Welcome to 3DLANES number 9. This time around, we will be going through the world of chronographs. And the title of this one, it's more like What's Up with Chronograph Movements. Something that I wanted to dig deeper for a long time. I had this post started for a long time as a blog, not as a podcast episode. But since the opportunity arose, I thought it would be a good idea to take it further. Definitely my first, not my first, sorry, my favorite watch complication. A complication so intricate that I would have not guessed how old it is. But our story can be traced back to Monet in the 1800s, and let me take you in it in the next few minutes. Uh, the beginning. Chronograph started in the 1800s with its creator being Louis Monet. But who was this guy? He was a watchmaker born in 1768. He completed the first chronograph in 1816, and he was known as the third timer. The actual name is in French, which I'm not gonna say. He was a tool for astronomical purposes. He was created to measure the passage of stars, the moon, the planets. This tool improved the measurement of time, going from 1/10 of a second to 1/60th of a second, thanks to its high frequency movement of 216,000 vibrations per hour, approximately 30 hertz. But what is a hertz? Let's take a sidebar for a moment and let's talk about this unit. If you're asking yourself what is a hertz, you're not alone. I did the same. Yes, it is a car rental company, but that's not exactly what we're talking about here. A hertz is the unit of measurement used to measure one cycle or oscillation per second. When it comes to watches, a hertz is measuring the frequency of a watch's balance wheel oscillations. Usually, the higher the frequency, the less susceptible to external disturbances, more precise and more stable. In chronographs, this translates to a higher frequency, the smaller the fraction of a second that can be measured, meaning the higher the frequency, the more precise the watch can be, and the higher the frequency, it can measure more precisely the to a smaller fraction of a second. Okay, let's get back to Monet. He was able to adapt a transit instrument, which originally was used for sea traveling. He invented the start and stop and reset functions for this. Um, for the frequency that Monet needed, there was nothing available at the time, so he had to push the boundaries to create this third timer. It took a century for another watchmaker to match the precision of this first chronograph. This is crazy stuff. Uh, 19th century and its further improvements. Our next step is still in the 19th century, continues with Nicolas Mathieu Roussac. This Mr. Roussac was also a huge influence on the chronograph. He came up with another invention, the inking chrono, or the seconds chrono. That's the way he called it. This was the first chronograph to finally be able to record the elapsed time intervals. Using, from what I understand, what now are subdials. So he was able to indicate the time elapsed through subdials. This new invention was specifically developed to time King Louis XVIII's horse racing. So meaning the task was, okay, I want to time my horses. You need to develop something. And that's what he did. Roussac presented his invention to the French Academy of Science in 1821. Fun fact, the same year, Central America and Mexico were reaching their independence. Roussac was granted the patent for his new invention in 1822, a year later. His version of the chronograph was able to measure up to 1/5 of a second. Maybe the second most notable fact is that Roussac was the first one to commercialize the chronograph. This helped set up the stage for the new chronograph wristwatches. In 1831, we have Joseph Thaddeus uh, Wiener. I honestly don't know how to say his last name, so we're gonna call him Winner because he won in life. Invented the double hand mechanism. That now is used on the better known Rattrapante mechanism. In 1844, Adolphe Nicole also had his contribution in developing the Rattrapante, refining the movement to what is now what we know today as the Rattrapante. This one took me some time to understand because it was mainly through descriptions. I've seen pictures. I didn't search for a video. Honestly, I try to crunch this one in a bit of time, so I didn't have time to see a video. If I have seen one in the metal, I've been so oblivious that I have not paid attention to a Retropante chronograph. I honestly don't think I have seen one before. The name Retropante can be translated to English as retrap. This because the watch has two chrono hands. This helps time two different intervals, meaning you can start one hand and then you can start the second one. When you stop the first hand, the second hand catches up to the first one, and then they both keep going together. And the retropante function helps both keep going together, right? Get it? Recatching, right? That's what it means. We move now to 1868 with Augustus Baud. This guy Augie, his contribution is one but very significant. He had the bright idea of moving the chrono module to the back of the watch, improving serviceability of the watches. And last, we move to the 1870s with Henry Alfred Lugrin. Henry developed the vertical clutch mechanism, making the watch more efficient and easier to install. All right, let's move to the 20th century. The 20th century also saw its fair share of chronograph developments. Maybe the biggest highlight, at least for me, is developing the first automatic chronograph in the 60s. Side note and fun fact about me, I'm really not crazy about automatic chronographs. I think it just adds to the bulk, the rotor. Maybe I'm just old school, but I like the hand wound chronographs, but that's just me. All right, let's go step by step. Mention significant chronograph milestones throughout the 20th century. Let's start in 1910s. Longines introduce the caliber 13.33Z, one of the first to be used on a chronograph worn on the wrist. I have not yet found anything conclusive to say that it is definitely the first one, but it's one of the first ones. At the same time, Breitling and Univers de Genève were introducing wristwatches with chronograph complications, so it's hard to tell which one was first. Let's just call them the first ones. In 1934, Willy Breitling introduced the first two-pusher chronograph movement. This established the architecture of the movements still used to this time. 2 years later, in 1936, Longines again submitted a patent for the first flyback mechanism. In 1969, we get to the highlight of the century. Because Zenith introduced the first automatic chrono with the caliber 11. This was a high frequency movement capable of measuring 1/10 of a second. But the same year, Seiko introduced their version of the automatic chrono. Seiko's had a vertical clutch and column wheel, which made it different from the Zenith. But it's crazy that both introduced automatic chronographs in 1969. Moving to the last quarter of the century, in 1975, Seiko introduced the 0635, a highlight for the digi lovers because it was a digital chronograph watch. By the end of the 1900s, in 1993, AP released the Royal Oak Offshore, very popular, way beyond my budget. At the end of the 1990s and early 2000s, it became the norm for big brands to develop their own calibers. This is mostly early 2000s, if I'm not mistaken, when Rolex started developing their own Daytona movements. if I'm not mistaken. Okay, so what are the challenges? Challenges that the chronograph encounter. The chronograph is a very, very complex watch to make. These calibers obviously require more pieces than a time only watch. This is why adding the chronograph function to watch is a very difficult task, especially without compromising accuracy and reliability. More parts also equals higher manufacturing prices, especially if it's a highly finished watch. Expanding from the previous point, which is the amount of parts, this can also translate to thicker and bulkier pieces. There are multiple ways to approach this, but the two I'd like to highlight are the fully integrated or the modular ones. As you might be assuming, the fully integrated is better received among enthusiasts. It can be more expensive, but it can also be thinner. The modular, as the name states, is a module attached to a regular movement. It is mostly cheaper, easier to assemble, and less glamorous among enthusiasts. It can also be a thicker piece. If you take into account the fact that the automatic chrono movement was not developed until the 60s, we can add it as a challenge. Throwing in the same bucket the different extra complications like the retropante, sometimes being a chronograph is not enough. Like nowadays, lately, within the last 10 years, the Octofinissimo is the latest addition to the modernization of the chronograph. Super thin watch, crazy feature, crazy achievement. As final thoughts, chronographs are not the tools that they used to be. I mean, yes, they're being taken to space still, but I think astronauts rely more on other tools than just their chronograph. Yeah, it can be a backup tool. It's not the primary divers with the dive watch is the same thing, right? Like no watch anymore is the primary tool for anybody. The wristwatches, mechanical watches are not the main tool. And I think we can all agree on that. Chronographs are still a tale of innovation and engineering development, at least to me. Whether you like the chronographs for their story or just because they look cool, they're a big, big, big part of the watch world. Definitely my favorite type of watch, the chronograph. Uh, I am lucky enough to own a Speedmaster, which I really, really love, and I think I'm really fortunate to do it. I mean, to own it. I don't take it for granted. I take appreciation for that every day. I try to wear as much as I can, but yeah. I mean, I'm not gonna go to space with it. I'm not gonna time anything. At one point, I was timing the way I made tea with it, and that's as far as I got. Otherwise, yeah, I time random things, but it's not a main tool that I'm going to use every day. It's not a do or die situation. It's just a feat of engineering. It's crazy to me that something so small can have so many moving parts and it can be so complicated. You know, kudos to watchmakers because to me it doesn't. It is not an easy profession. I really, really appreciate what they do. And yeah, I really do love chronographs. If you want me to cover any other type of movement or watch, let me know. One huge resource that I want to give a shout out to is Caliber Corner. Caliber Corner. I think it's .com, but they are a huge resource. They have a huge kind of like encyclopedia of movements. Yes, calibercorner.com. I can leave it on the blog post or on the show notes. Uh, but yeah, I would recommend you to go there and check out information if you're interested about a caliber that you're looking for. Give these guys a follow on Instagram. They're great. They're huge. I mean, they put out all this information for free. I know they had or they still do have paid platforms, but yeah, mostly Caliber Corner is free. and it's really, really appreciated. I use it a lot on my website to reference stuff. So give them a follow, have it on your bookmarks, uh, thank them. I don't know, whatever. But this is where we leave it with the chronographs. I appreciate your time. I am Danny Lanes, been your host. Thanks so much for listening. Have a great rest of the week.